as the nature of what is usually called love begins to come into question. One element becomes central to examine more closely: attachment. For most people, attachment is not only accepted, it is often mistaken for love itself. To feel attached is to feel connected, to feel needed, to feel that someone matters deeply. So it is rarely questioned. But when attention looks carefully, something very different begins to reveal itself. Attachment is not simply connection. It is dependence, psychological dependence. The mind begins to rely on another person for stability, for comfort, for identity. This person is important to me. I need them. My life is better because they are here. At first, this may seem natural, even beautiful. But within it, something else is already present: fear. Because what is depended upon can be lost, can change, can move away. And the moment that possibility exists, attachment carries its shadow. The fear of losing, the fear of being alone, the fear of emptiness. This creates a subtle tension within the relationship, a need to maintain, to protect, to hold. And from that need, other movements begin to appear: jealousy, control, expectation, possessiveness. Not necessarily in obvious ways, but as underlying currents shaping how the relationship functions. This is why attachment and conflict are closely linked. Because attachment is not free. It is bound to conditions, bound to continuity, bound to the idea that something must remain in order for you to be okay. And when that continuity is threatened, disturbance appears. But love, if it exists at all, cannot be bound in this way. It cannot depend on something remaining unchanged. It cannot require the other to fulfill a role. Because the moment it does, it is no longer free. It becomes a transaction, a mutual agreement, a structure of exchange. I give you this, you give me that. Even if it is subtle, even if it is unspoken. So when attention sees attachment clearly, not as something wrong, but as something understood, something begins to shift. The confusion between attachment and love starts to dissolve. It becomes clear that attachment may feel intense, it may feel meaningful, but it carries fear within it. And where there is fear, there is no freedom. And without freedom, can there be love? This question is not meant to be answered quickly. It is meant to be observed, lived, seen in relationship itself, as it unfolds, moment by moment, now.
When attachment is no longer confused with love, when it is seen clearly as dependence, as fear, as the need for continuity, something entirely different begins to come into view. Not something created, not something cultivated, but something that was never part of attachment to begin with. Because what falls away is not love. It is everything that was mistaken for it. The holding, the needing, the fear of losing, the expectation of return. And in the absence of all that, something very quiet begins to reveal itself. There is still care, but without fear. There is still connection, but without possession. There is still closeness, but without dependency. This is not distance. It is not detachment in the sense of withdrawal. It is a deeper intimacy, because nothing stands in between. No image, no demand, no expectation shaping what the other should be. The other person is no longer experienced as something to hold on to, or something to complete you. They are seen as they are, free to be what they are. And in that freedom, something unexpected happens. There is no longer a need to control, no need to secure, no need to define the relationship in terms of continuity. It is alive moment to moment, not based on what has been, not dependent on what should be, just what is. This does not mean that there is no sensitivity. In fact, sensitivity becomes deeper because the mind is no longer protecting itself. It is open, vulnerable in the true sense, not as weakness, but as the absence of defense. And in that openness, something becomes possible that was not before. A form of love that does not belong to the self, that is not shaped by memory, not extended through thought, not dependent on time. It is not something you can hold, not something you can maintain, because it is not created. It appears when everything that is not love is no longer active. And because of that, it cannot be lost, because it was never possessed. It is not tied to a person, not limited to a relationship. It is present whenever there is no fear, no attachment, no division. And in that, something becomes absolutely clear. Love is not something that can be practiced, or improved, or developed. It is what remains when the mind is no longer interfering. And in that absence, what is revealed is not personal, not conditional, but something far deeper, something that does not begin and does not end, only appears when there is space for it to be. Now. Love is perhaps the most used word in relationship, and also the most misunderstood. It is spoken of as something known, something felt, something shared. But when attention begins to look more closely, a question emerges that is rarely asked. What is love when it is not shaped by condition? For most of life, what is called love is closely tied to thought, to memory, to experience. I love you because of how you make me feel, because of what you give me, because of what we share, because of what you represent in my life. These reasons may feel natural, even meaningful, but they reveal something important. Love, as it is usually experienced, is conditional. It depends on something, on behavior, on continuity, on expectation. And because of that, it is unstable. If the condition changes, the feeling changes. If the expectation is not met, conflict appears. If the image is disturbed, the connection weakens. This creates a form of relationship that is constantly negotiating, adjusting, protecting, holding. And within that movement, something subtle is always present. Fear. The fear of losing what is called love. The fear of change, the fear of not receiving. Because what is being held is not free, it is dependent on what the other does, on how they behave, on how they respond. This reveals something fundamental. What is usually called love is often a mixture of attachment, of desire, of memory, of expectation. And within that mixture, love becomes entangled with the self, with its needs, with its fears. But if all of that is seen clearly without rejecting it, without justifying it, another question begins to open. Is love something that can exist without condition, without dependence, without the structure of because? Not as an idea, but as a fact. And in that question, something begins to shift, because it is no longer about improving love or making it better. It is about understanding what it is not. And in that understanding, space begins to appear for something entirely different to be seen. Perhaps for the first time, without distortion. Now,